A simple Hawaii girl missed the bus. Unexpectedly, a kind Texas millionaire gave her a ride and fell in love with her. The sun had long since dipped below the horizon, leaving the Hawaiian sky painted in deep hues of purple and orange. The salty breeze carried the faint scent of plumeria through the air, mixing with the lingering aroma of freshly brewed coffee that clung to Leilani Kealoha's uniform. She exhaled, wiping her damp hands on her apron before untying it and stuffing it into her canvas tote bag. It had been another long shift at the cafe, serving tourists, brewing endless cups of Kona coffee, and dodging the occasional flirtatious comment from customers who mistook her hospitality for interest. All she wanted now was to catch the last bus home, kick off her shoes, and let the exhaustion of the day melt away. But fate had other plans. As she stepped outside, the warm air had turned heavy and thick, the telltale sign of an impending storm. She quickened her pace, weaving through the narrow streets toward the bus stop, her heart pounding as she turned the corner, only to see the bus pulling away. "No, no, no, wait," she called out, waving desperately, but the driver either didn't see her or didn't care. Her stomach dropped as she skidded to a halt, watching the taillights disappear down the road. A single fat raindrop landed on her cheek, then another, and within seconds, the sky opened up. Cold, heavy rain poured down mercilessly, soaking through her thin uniform in an instant. The once dry pavement turned slick, water pooling in uneven patches along the road. Leilani wrapped her arms around herself, her body shivering as she stared down the empty street. The next bus wouldn't come for another hour, and walking home in this weather was not an option. Perfect. Just perfect. She sighed, brushing wet strands of hair from her face, preparing to endure a miserable wait, when the low hum of an engine broke through the downpour. Headlights pierced through the rain, a sleek black pickup truck rolling to a slow stop near the curb. The tinted window on the driver's side lowered smoothly, revealing the last person she expected to see on a stormy night like this. A man, tall, broad-shouldered, with a rugged handsomeness that didn't belong to any tourist she'd ever met. He was too polished for a local, yet too laid back for a businessman. His dark hair was slightly tousled, the sleeves of his crisp white button-down rolled up just enough to suggest he wasn't afraid to get his hands dirty. And then there were his eyes, an arresting shade of blue that seemed both calculating and amused, as if he were assessing her predicament with quiet curiosity. "You look like you could use a ride," he said, voice smooth and laced with a Texan drawl. Leilani froze, her instinctual caution kicking in immediately. A stranger, a man. She should say no. She should back away. But then a particularly strong gust of wind sent a shiver down her spine, and she realized just how miserable she was. The rain wasn't letting up. Her uniform was drenched, her sandals slipping uncomfortably against the wet pavement, and she knew if she didn't get out of this storm soon, she'd end up with a cold or worse. Still, she hesitated. "I don't usually take rides from strangers," she admitted, her voice barely above the rain's relentless pounding. A ghost of a smirk played at the man's lips. "Well, I don't usually pick up strangers either, so I guess that makes two of us." Leilani narrowed her eyes, weighing her options. She could wait in the rain like an idiot. Or she could get into the warm, dry truck of a man who, despite his overly confident demeanor, didn't exactly give off serial killer vibes. Not the safest bet, but at this moment, her only option. With a reluctant sigh, she nodded. "All right," she said, stepping closer, rain dripping from her lashes. "Just don't make me regret this." Jackson Caldwell's grin widened just slightly as he reached over and pushed the passenger door open. "Hop in, Hawaii girl. I promise I won't bite." Leilani rolled her eyes but climbed inside, completely unaware that this single ride would change everything. The moment Leilani closed the truck door behind her, she felt the warmth of the cabin wrap around her like a comforting embrace. The soft hum of the engine, the scent of leather and faint cologne, and the contrast between the storm outside and the dry sanctuary inside made her shoulders relax just a little. Jackson reached toward the center console, pulling out a clean white towel, and handed it to her without a word. "Here," he said casually. Leilani hesitated before taking it. The fabric was soft and expensive, nothing like the threadbare towels at home. "Thanks," she murmured, dabbing at the raindrops clinging to her face and arms. Jackson turned a dial on the dashboard, and warm air drifted from the vents, making her shiver slightly as the contrast hit her damp skin. She glanced at him warily. "You're prepared." He smirked but kept his eyes on the road. "Let's just say, I don't like being uncomfortable." Leilani let out a small huff of amusement, wrapping the towel around her shoulders. Silence settled between them, filled only by the occasional swipe of the windshield wipers against the glass. Then Jackson spoke. "So, where am I taking you?" Leilani hesitated for a split second. "Tantalus Drive," she finally said, half expecting him to question it. His brows lifted slightly. "Up the mountain?" She nodded. Jackson let out a low whistle. "That's a long way from here." "You were really planning to wait for the next bus in this storm?" Leilani shifted, suddenly feeling a little embarrassed. "I didn't exactly have a choice." He glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "You live up there?" "Yeah, with my grandma and younger brother." Jackson's grip on the wheel tightened slightly, but he said nothing. Leilani turned toward him, watching his profile cautiously. He had a strong jaw, a hint of stubble, and an easy confidence about him that was impossible to ignore. She cleared her throat. "Listen, I appreciate the ride, but I don't usually do this." Jackson smirked. "Get into strangers' trucks in the middle of a storm?" "Exactly." "Good." He shot her a brief glance, eyes glinting with amusement. "Because I don't usually pick up strangers either." Leilani let out a reluctant chuckle. "Guess we're both breaking rules tonight." Jackson tilted his head slightly. "Guess so." The rain continued pounding against the windshield, but inside the truck, the tension slowly eased. A few minutes passed before Jackson spoke again. "So, what's your story?" Leilani arched a brow. "My story?" "Yeah. What does a girl like you do when she's not catching rides from suspiciously charming men?" Leilani rolled her eyes. "I work at a cafe near the beach." Jackson nodded as if he'd already guessed that. "You like it?" Leilani paused, then shrugged. "It pays the bills." Jackson glanced at her sideways, sensing there was more. "But," she hesitated. "But I have bigger dreams," she admitted. "I want to open my own little place someday. Nothing fancy. Just a cozy spot where locals and tourists can come for real, authentic Hawaiian coffee. No corporate chains. No overpriced, watered-down stuff." Jackson was silent for a moment, then he nodded approvingly. "That's a solid dream," he said. Leilani wasn't sure why, but hearing that felt good. Like her ambitions weren't just some far-fetched fantasy. She dared a small, curious glance at him. "What about you?" Jackson chuckled. "Oh, I ride around in expensive trucks, rescuing stranded girls in storms. Just another day in the life." Leilani rolled her eyes, but she couldn't help the small smile that tugged at her lips. Before she could press him for a real answer, the truck lurched. Jackson's expression shifted in an instant. "Ah, hell," he muttered, steering the truck toward the side of the road. The truck rolled to a stop on the edge of an empty road, the rain still coming down in heavy sheets. Leilani frowned. "What just happened?" Jackson sighed, already unbuckling his seatbelt. "Sounds like a flat." "A flat tire? In this weather?" "Great timing, right?" He shot her a smirk before pushing open the door. Leilani hesitated, then followed, pulling the towel tighter around her shoulders as she stepped into the rain. Jackson was already crouched near the back wheel, inspecting the damage. Leilani shivered. "Can you fix it?" Jackson looked up at her, rain dripping down his face, and grinned. "What, you think rich guys don't know how to change a tire?" Leilani blinked. "Wait, you're rich?" Jackson froze for half a second, then let out a laugh. "I meant that as a joke. But yeah, I guess so." Leilani stared at him, processing, "You don't exactly dress like a millionaire." "Should I have worn a tux?" Leilani snorted. "I don't know. Maybe a sign that says I'm important." Jackson laughed, shaking his head as he got to work. Duly noted. Leilani watched in genuine surprise as Jackson skillfully removed the damaged tire, replacing it with efficiency and ease. Most of the tourists she met at the cafe wouldn't even know how to pop the hood of their rental cars, let alone fix a flat in the middle of a downpour. This man, who apparently had money, was doing it himself without hesitation. Something about that intrigued her. She knelt down beside him, ignoring the way the rain soaked through her already damp clothes. "Here," she said, reaching for the lug nuts before he could. Jackson raised a brow. "You know how to do this." Leilani smirked. "I grew up with a brother who thought wrecking his dirt bike was a personality trait. I learned a few things." Jackson looked at her differently then, something like impressed amusement flickering in his eyes. For a moment, neither of them spoke as they worked together, the rain drumming against the pavement. Then, Leilani's fingers accidentally brushed against his as she passed him the wrench. A small spark shot through her hand, unexpected and unsettling. She froze, staring at where their hands had touched. Jackson's gaze flickered to her, his expression momentarily unreadable. Neither of them spoke. The storm raged on around them, but for just a second. Something else crackled in the air between them. Something neither of them had been expecting. The truck rumbled quietly as it rolled to a stop in front of a small, modest house nestled among the lush greenery of the hillside. The rain had finally eased into a light drizzle, the scent of damp earth and plumeria flowers filling the air. Leilani unclipped her seatbelt, hesitating for a moment before turning to Jackson. "Thanks for the ride. And, for not being a serial killer." Jackson smirked, resting an arm casually on the steering wheel. "No problem. And thanks for not stealing my truck." Leilani let out a soft chuckle. "Tempting, but I'll pass." She reached for the door handle, but before she could step out, Jackson spoke again. He said, tilting his head slightly. "That coffee you were talking about earlier, I never got to try it." Leilani blinked, caught off guard. "What?" Jackson shrugged. "I figure I owe you for the whole flat tire situation. What do you say? Can I stop by your cafe tomorrow?" Leilani hesitated. She wasn't used to men like him showing interest in anything related to her life. Yet, something about the way he asked, so casual yet oddly sincere, made her nod before she could second-guess herself. "Sure," she said, then quickly added, "but no special treatment. You wait in line like everyone else." Jackson grinned. "Wouldn't dream of it." Leilani rolled her eyes and stepped out, shutting the door behind her. She walked up the small pathway to her front door, but she could still feel his gaze on her. As she turned the doorknob, she glanced back. Jackson was still watching. And for the first time in a long time, Leilani felt something new stir inside her, something dangerous and exciting all at once. The morning sun cast a warm glow over the island, the salty ocean breeze drifting through the open-air cafe where Leilani worked. It was a quiet kind of morning, the lull before the midday rush. She should have been relaxed, but she wasn't. Her hands tightened around the ceramic mug she was drying, her heart skipping a completely irrational beat every time the bell above the door chimed. Why was she nervous? Jackson had only asked for coffee. It wasn't a big deal, right? Right? She shook her head, trying to focus on work, when the sound of heavy footsteps echoed across the wooden floor. Then, a familiar deep voice. "Hope I'm not too late for the best coffee on the island." Leilani stiffened. She turned slowly, and there he was, Jackson Caldwell, standing just inside the entrance, looking ridiculously out of place and completely at ease at the same time. Dressed more casually today, a fitted navy t-shirt and jeans that somehow made him look even more annoyingly attractive, he surveyed the cafe like he belonged there. And that was the problem. He didn't belong here, which is why everyone was staring. Leilani's co-worker, Malia, elbowed her in the ribs, grinning like she had just won the lottery. "Who's the cowboy?" Malia whispered. Leilani scowled, feeling her cheeks heat. "He's not, just take his order." Malia ignored her completely and waltzed up to the counter. "Welcome. What can we get you?" Jackson barely glanced at the menu. "I'll take whatever Leilani recommends." Malia's grin widened. "Oh, so this is personal." Leilani shot her a glare before stepping forward. "Fine. One Hawaiian pour-over coming up." Jackson's smirk was undeniably amused. "Sounds fancy." Leilani didn't respond. Instead, she turned sharply and focused on making the coffee, because that was something she could control. She carefully selected the beans, grinding them to the perfect consistency before slowly pouring hot water over the grounds in a circular motion. The rich aroma of fresh coffee filled the air, and for a moment, everything else faded away. She didn't look up until she placed the cup in front of him. "There," she said. "Enjoy." Jackson wrapped his large, calloused hands around the ceramic mug, lifting it to his lips. Leilani watched, waiting for his reaction. Jackson took a slow sip, eyes closing briefly, then exhaled. "Damn," he murmured. "That's good." Something warm bloomed in Leilani's chest, but she quickly tamped it down. "Told you." Jackson grinned, but before he could say anything, Malia leaned over the counter. "So, Jackson, what brings you to our little island?" Leilani silently prayed for a distraction, but Jackson simply leaned back, completely unfazed. "Business," he said easily. "But now, coffee." Malia laughed, clearly enjoying this. "Well, if you need a tour guide, I'm available." Leilani rolled her eyes. "Malia, don't you have tables to clean?" Malia smirked but finally walked away, leaving the two of them alone. Jackson took another sip of his coffee, his gaze settling on her again. "So," he said, tilting his head slightly, "do I get a frequent customer discount if I come back?" Leilani crossed her arms. "No." Jackson chuckled. "Brutal. You can afford it." His smirk didn't fade. "True." Leilani narrowed her eyes, but deep down, she felt something dangerously close to amusement. And then, it happened. As she reached for a napkin, her fingers accidentally brushed against his. It was barely a touch, but it sent a jolt of something electric through her veins. She froze. Jackson did too. Oh. For a split second, neither of them moved, their hands still touching, the air suddenly thick with something neither of them was ready to acknowledge. Then, just as quickly, Leilani pulled away, feeling her face heat. Jackson, however, didn't look the least bit rattled. If anything, he looked intrigued. He leaned forward slightly, resting his arms on the counter. "See you tomorrow, Hawaii girl." Leilani huffed. "Don't you have business to attend to?" Jackson grinned, completely unfazed. "I do, but I also have coffee to drink." Leilani sighed. Because somehow, she knew this wouldn't be the last time he showed up at her cafe. The Hawaiian sun hung high in the sky, casting a golden glow over the lively outdoor market. The scent of grilled pineapple, fresh seafood, and tropical flowers filled the air, blending with the hum of vendors calling out their daily specials. Leilani weaved through the crowd, her woven tote bag already half filled with fresh mangoes, a bundle of taro leaves, and a few melisades she planned to bring home. It was her one day off from the cafe, and she planned to enjoy it. Or at least, that was the plan. Until she saw him. Jackson Caldwell, the last person she expected to run into, stood in front of a small food stall, frowning at the menu like it was written in another language. Leilani stopped mid-step, watching in amusement as he scratched the back of his neck, staring down at a steaming dish that had just been placed in front of him. He picked up a fork, hesitated, then turned it slightly, inspecting the plate like he was trying to decipher a secret code. Leilani smirked. "You look like you're in trouble," she called out. Jackson's head snapped up, and the moment he saw her, a slow, amused grin spread across his face. "Hawaii girl," he drawled, stepping away from the counter. "Perfect timing. I need a translator." Leilani walked up beside him, glancing down at the dish. "Lao lao." Jackson lifted a brow. "That's supposed to mean something to me." She rolled her eyes. "It's pork wrapped in taro leaves. A local favorite." Jackson nodded slowly, but his expression remained skeptical. "And you're telling me this green stuff is edible?" Leilani laughed, crossing her arms. "It's not just edible. It's delicious. But I get it. Texans probably don't eat anything that's not barbecued." Jackson smirked. "Hey now, don't underestimate us. We do eat vegetables, mostly when they're deep fried." Leilani shook her head, trying to suppress a smile. "Just try it." Jackson sighed dramatically before spearing a bite with his fork. He took a cautious bite, chewed, and his brows lifted slightly. "Okay," he admitted, pointing his fork at her. "That's actually good." Leilani grinned. "Told you." Jackson studied her for a moment, then gestured toward the rest of the market. "Since you're clearly the expert here, how about you show me what else I should be eating?" Leilani hesitated, but then she saw the hopeful glint in his eyes, something warm, something easy, and before she could second-guess herself, she nodded. "All right, Texas. Let's see if you can handle real Hawaiian food." They wandered through the market, stopping at different stalls as Leilani introduced him to her favorite dishes, poke bowls, kololo, fresh coconut water, straight from the shell. Jackson, to his credit, tried everything, even when he looked skeptical. "You're actually not bad at this," Leilani admitted after he downed a bite of poi without flinching. Jackson smirked. "I'll take that as a compliment." They continued walking, the conversation flowing effortlessly. Jackson talked about growing up in Texas, how his grandfather built their family business from nothing, and how he spent his summers working on ranches instead of taking vacations. Leilani shared stories about her childhood on the island, how she learned to surf before she could ride a bike, and how her grandmother taught her to make the perfect cup of coffee. For a man who clearly had money, Jackson was surprisingly down to earth. He listened more than he talked, asked thoughtful questions, and never once looked at his phone. It was nice. Too nice. Which is why it caught her completely off guard when the first raindrop landed on her nose. She looked up just as the sky darkened, thick clouds rolling in faster than expected. Oh, she muttered. Jackson frowned. That doesn't look good. And then, the sky opened up. Within seconds, the market erupted into chaos as vendors scrambled to cover their stalls and people dashed for shelter. Leilani grabbed Jackson's wrist, pulling him toward the nearest overhang. Come on. They sprinted through the downpour, the warm tropical rain soaking them instantly. By the time they reached the small covered alcove of a closed surf shop, both were dripping wet, hair plastered to their faces. Jackson ran a hand through his soaked hair, letting out a short laugh. Well, this wasn't part of the plan. Leilani shivered, hugging herself. You didn't check the weather, did you? Jackson shrugged. I like surprises. Leilani shook her head, smiling despite herself. The rain pounded against the pavement, the scent of wet earth and salt filling the space between them. They stood shoulder to shoulder, bodies close out of necessity. And suddenly the air felt different. The market noise had faded, leaving only the steady rhythm of the rain and the quiet pulse of tension between them. Leilani became painfully aware of how close they were, how the heat of his body contrasted with the cool air around them, how his wet shirt clung to his frame, how his gaze seemed a little softer than before. Jackson exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. I swear, he said, his voice quieter now, every time I see you, I end up drenched. Leilani let out a breathless laugh. Maybe it's a sign. Jackson looked at her then, really looked at her, and for the first time, Leilani felt her stomach flip for a reason that had nothing to do with nerves. The space between them felt too small. Or maybe it wasn't small enough. The rain continued to fall, but neither of them moved. And in that moment, standing beneath that tiny overhang in the middle of a storm, Leilani realized something. She was in trouble. Big trouble. The cafe was buzzing with the usual morning crowd, the air thick with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee and the sound of steaming milk frothers. Leilani moved behind the counter with practiced ease, pouring espresso shots and handing out pastries, her mind still lingering on the events of the past few days. Ever since that day at the market, the rain, the unspoken tension, the way Jackson had looked at her like she was the only thing that mattered, something had shifted between them. And that terrified her. She needed to keep her distance. But before she could figure out how to do that, Malia, her ever-intrusive co-worker, shoved her phone in front of Leilani's face. Care to explain this? Leilani blinked at the screen, confused. Then she saw it. A headline from a business news site. Jackson Caldwell, the Texas oil heir expanding his empire to luxury resorts. Below it was a picture of him, Jackson, dressed in a sharp navy suit, standing in front of a massive resort development. Leilani felt her stomach drop. Malia smirked, oblivious to Leilani's internal crisis. So the guy who's been making hard eyes at you for the past week. Turns out he's not just rich, he's stupid rich. Leilani's heart pounded in her chest. Jackson? A millionaire? No, not just that, the heir to a Texas oil fortune? It felt impossible. And yet, as she stared at the article, it all made sense. The truck. The confidence. The way he never seemed rushed or worried about money. He hadn't even mentioned his last name. Because why would he? Guys like him didn't belong in places like this, in her world. And she had been stupid to think otherwise. She shoved the phone back at Malia, her face tight. It doesn't matter. Malia arched a brow. Doesn't matter? Girl, if some rich Texas cowboy was into me, I'd be picking out wedding venues by now. Leilani forced a laugh, trying to ignore the ache blooming in her chest. Because it did matter. More than she wanted to admit. She needed to end this. Before she got too close. Before she got hurt. The first time she ignored his text, it was easy. The second time, it was harder. By the third, it felt like she was ripping out a piece of herself. Jackson texted her every day. Jackson, morning Hawaii girl? Coffee today? Jackson, ignoring me, huh? I'll take that as a challenge. Jackson, did I do something? Jackson, Leilani, talk to me. But she didn't. She couldn't. Ty. Because what was the point? A man like him, a millionaire, an oil heir, would eventually leave. He had a life in Texas, businesses all over the country. She was just a small-town girl working in a cafe, struggling to make ends meet. She was nothing like the women in his world. and she refused to be another passing distraction. So she avoided him, stopped checking her phone, ducked into the back when she saw his truck pass by the cafe, told herself this was the right thing to do. Then, one evening, after closing up the cafe, she stepped outside and nearly collided with a wall of solid muscle. Or rather, Jackson. Leilani gasped, stepping back as Jackson stood there, arms crossed, his expression a mix of frustration and something else, something deeper. "You've been avoiding me," he said, his voice calm but firm. Leilani's pulse raced, but she forced herself to act indifferent. "I've been busy." Jackson arched a brow. "Bullshit." She bristled, crossing her arms. "I don't owe you anything, Jackson." His jaw tightened. "Maybe not, but I think I at least deserve an explanation." Leilani looked away, her chest aching. "You don't belong here." Jackson's eyes darkened. "What the hell does that mean?" "It means," she swallowed hard, "it means you're you. You're rich. You have an empire waiting for you back in Texas. And I'm just," she let out a bitter laugh. "I'm just a girl who missed the bus." Silence stretched between them. Then, Jackson stepped closer. "So that's what this is about." His voice was low, steady, but there was an undeniable edge to it. "You think I don't belong here? Or you think you don't belong with me?" Leilani clenched her fists. "Does it matter?" Jackson let out a slow exhale, running a hand through his hair. "You know," he murmured, shaking his head, "I thought you were different." Leilani stiffened. "I thought you weren't like the people back home," Jackson continued, his voice rougher now, "judging me based on my bank account. Assuming I'm just some spoiled rich guy who doesn't know what real life looks like." Her breath hitched, guilt twisting in her stomach. "That's not." "Then what is it, Leilani?" he demanded. "Because from where I'm standing, the only person putting walls between us is you." Leilani felt her chest tighten. She wanted to argue, wanted to tell him he was wrong. But was he? Before she could say anything, Jackson let out a bitter chuckle. "You know what?" He took a step back, shaking his head. "Forget it." Leilani's breath caught. "Jackson, I don't chase people who don't want to be caught." And with that, he turned and walked away, leaving Leilani standing in the dim glow of the streetlight, feeling like she had just made the biggest mistake of her life. Leilani hadn't seen Jackson in days. Ever since their last confrontation, the anger in his voice, the way he had walked away without looking back, her world had felt off balance. She had told herself this was for the best, that letting him go was the right thing to do. So why did it feel like she was drowning in regret? The cafe felt emptier without him. Every time the door chimed, she would instinctively glance up, only to feel that sharp pang of disappointment when it wasn't him. She hated this, hated how much she missed him, and yet she couldn't bring herself to reach out. She had made her choice. But that choice came crashing down the moment she stepped out of the cafe one evening and found Jackson standing there, waiting for her. Her breath caught. He looked different, less composed, less guarded, like he had been wrestling with something just as much as she had. Before she could say a word, he closed the distance between them, his eyes burning with frustration, but also something deeper. And then he reached for her wrist, gently but firmly, stopping her from walking past him. "Why are you avoiding me?" Leilani's heart pounded violently. She tried to look away, to pull back, but Jackson wasn't letting her go this time. "Tell me the truth, Leilani," he said, his voice lower now, filled with something raw. "Was it really about the money? Or were you just scared?" Her lips parted, but no words came out. Because he was right. She had been scared. Scared of how he made her feel. Scared of wanting something she thought she could never have. Jackson's grip loosened slightly, but he didn't step back. "Just tell me," he murmured. "Because I can't stop thinking about you, and it's driving me insane." Leilani squeezed her eyes shut, inhaling sharply. And then, the truth spilled out before she could stop it. "Because you're too perfect, Jackson." He stilled, his brows drawing together. She let out a shaky breath, her walls breaking piece by piece. "You come from a world I don't belong in. You have everything: money, freedom, a future. And I'm just a girl who serves coffee, trying to make ends meet." She swallowed hard, her voice barely above a whisper. "How am I supposed to believe that this is real?" Silence. A silence so heavy it felt like the air around them had thickened. Then, Jackson let out a slow, measured breath, his hand sliding down to gently cup both of hers. "You think I care about any of that?" Leilani's throat tightened. Jackson shook his head, his gaze so intense it made her knees weak. "I don't care about the money, Leilani. I don't care about where we come from, or what people think. The only thing I care about," his fingers tightened slightly around hers, "is you." Leilani's breath hitched. She felt exposed, vulnerable in a way she never had before. And yet, for the first time, she believed him. And that was terrifying. Jackson stepped even closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Tell me you don't feel the same way, and I'll walk away. For good this time." Leilani's chest ached, her entire body trembling under the weight of this moment. She couldn't say it, because it would be a lie. She wanted him, more than she had ever wanted anything. And Jackson must have seen the answer in her eyes, because before she could say another word, he lifted his hand and gently tilted her chin up. Leilani froze, her breath caught in her throat. And then his lips met hers. Soft, slow, like he was giving her a chance to pull away, but she didn't. Because the moment his lips touched hers, everything else faded away. It wasn't just a kiss. It was a promise. That she wasn't just another passing moment for him. That she wasn't just a girl who missed the bus. That she was the only thing that mattered to him. And as Leilani melted into him, her hands gripping his shirt, her heart racing faster than ever before, she finally let herself believe it. The sun hung low over the ocean, casting golden streaks across the sky as Leilani sat on her front porch, staring blankly at the email on her phone. "Dear Ms. Kialoha, we are pleased to offer you the position of cafe manager at Pacific Brews, Oahu. Your experience and passion for the craft of coffee make you the perfect fit for our growing team." The words blurred as her mind raced in circles. This was everything she had worked for: a stable job, a real chance to grow in the coffee business, a stepping stone to her dream of owning her own cafe one day. But if she took it, she would have to leave Maui. Leave the cafe she loved. Leave Jackson. She let out a shaky breath, pressing the phone against her forehead. What was she supposed to do? The next morning she found herself back at the cafe, standing behind the counter, but her mind was miles away. Malia, ever the observant one, didn't miss a thing. "You've been weird all morning," she said, handing Leilani a tray of pastries to restock. "Spill it." Leilani hesitated. Then, with a sigh, she muttered, "I got a job offer." Malia's eyes lit up. "Oh my God, that's amazing. Where?" "Oahu." The excitement on Malia's face dimmed slightly. "Oahu. That's far." Leilani nodded slowly, running a hand through her hair. "Yeah, it's a big opportunity. More money, more experience. But I don't know." Malia studied her for a second before crossing her arms. "Let me guess. This hesitation has something to do with a certain tall, handsome Texan?" Leilani groaned. "It's not just about him. It's about everything. My family. My life here. But yeah, Jackson is part of it." Malia smirked. "So what did he say?" Leilani bit her lip. "I haven't told him yet." Malia's brows shot up. "Girl, what are you waiting for?" Leilani had no answer. Because deep down, she was terrified of what Jackson would say. Or worse, what he wouldn't say. That evening, as if sensing something was off, Jackson showed up. Leilani had barely stepped outside the cafe when she saw his truck parked out front, the sight of it making her chest tighten. Jackson leaned against the door, arms crossed, his sharp blue eyes locked onto her immediately. "All right, Hawaii girl," he drawled. "What's going on?" Leilani hesitated, fingers curling into the hem of her apron. "You always show up when I least expect it," she muttered. Jackson smirked. "Maybe you're just always expecting me now." Leilani rolled her eyes, but the warmth in his voice made her heart ache even more. She exhaled, then finally said the words out loud. "I got a job offer. On Oahu." Jackson's expression shifted instantly, his jaw tightening just slightly. But to her surprise, he didn't look shocked. Instead, he just studied her carefully, as if trying to read the thoughts she wasn't saying. Finally, he nodded. "Okay." Leilani blinked. "Okay?" Jackson shrugged. "Isn't this what you wanted?" Her throat tightened. I think so, but I don't know." Jackson let out a slow breath before stepping closer. "You're scared." Leilani swallowed hard. "Yeah." "Of leaving? Or of what happens if you stay?" She looked away. "Both." Jackson was silent for a moment. Then, gently but firmly, he reached out, lifting her chin so she had to look at him. "Leilani," he said, his voice soft but steady, "if this is your dream, I'm not going to be the guy who holds you back. If this is what you want, go for it." Leilani's heart ached. "And what about us?" Jackson's expression didn't waver. "We figure it out." She searched his face, looking for doubt, but there was none. "You don't have to pick between me and your dreams," he murmured. "I don't want you to." A lump formed in her throat. She had spent so much time convincing herself that she had to choose, that it was either her future or Jackson. But maybe it didn't have to be that way. Maybe love didn't mean sacrifice. Maybe it meant having someone who wanted you to fly, even if it meant they couldn't hold you as tightly. Her chest felt too full, her emotions overwhelming. And Jackson must have seen it in her eyes, because he smiled, just slightly, before whispering, "Whatever you decide, Leilani, I'm not going anywhere." And just like that, she knew. She knew what she wanted. She knew where she belonged. And suddenly the choice wasn't so difficult after all. Leilani stood on the cliffside, watching the waves crash against the shore below. The salty breeze tangled in her hair, and the sun dipped lower toward the horizon, painting the sky in hues of gold and rose. This was home. And suddenly she knew she couldn't leave it behind. Not for a job. Not for the promise of something bigger. Because this place, this island, this life, it was already everything she needed. Her dream wasn't about working at some high-end cafe on another island. It was about creating something of her own right here. She smiled to herself, feeling the weight that had been pressing on her chest finally lift. Decision made. Now, she just had to tell Jackson. When Leilani arrived at the beach later that evening, Jackson was already there, standing barefoot in the sand, his hands tucked casually into his pockets. The golden light of the sunset cast a warm glow over him, making him look even more impossibly handsome than usual. He turned as she approached, his blue eyes searching hers immediately. "So," he said, his voice laced with quiet curiosity, "what's it going to be, Hawaii girl?" Leilani took a deep breath, then smiled softly. "I'm staying." Jackson's brows lifted slightly. "Because of me?" Leilani shook her head. "Because of me." His lips curled into a slow, knowing grin. "Good," he murmured. "Because I wasn't planning on letting you go, anyway." Leilani let out a breathless laugh. "Oh, really? Really?" And then, before she could process what was happening, Jackson reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Leilani's heart stopped. Her breath caught as he dropped to one knee, the sand shifting beneath him. For a moment, all she could hear was the crashing of the waves and the pounding of her own heart. Jackson looked up at her, his expression steady, confident, completely sure. "I wasn't planning on doing this tonight," he admitted, voice rough with emotion. "But hell, if I've learned anything from you, it's that sometimes life doesn't go according to plan." Leilani couldn't breathe. Jackson exhaled softly, gaze locking onto hers. "I love you, Leilani. And not just in the this is a sweet summer romance kind of way. I love you in the you drive me crazy, but I can't imagine my life without you kind of way." Leilani let out a soft, choked laugh, her eyes stinging with tears. Jackson's lips twitched, but his voice stayed steady. "So, what do you say?" He lifted the box, revealing a beautiful ring, simple, elegant, timeless. "Marry me, Hawaii girl?" Leilani's vision blurred with tears, her heart so full it could barely fit inside her chest. There was only one answer. "Yes," she whispered, voice trembling. Jackson grinned, sliding the ring onto her finger before pulling her into his arms, lifting her off the ground as she laughed through her happy tears. And as the waves crashed behind them and the sun sank into the ocean, Leilani knew she had made the right choice. Because home wasn't just this island. Home was him. 1 year later. The soft chime of the cafe's bell rang as a small group of customers wandered inside, the scent of fresh coffee and salty ocean air filling the space. Leilani stood behind the counter, carefully pouring a cup of her signature Hawaiian roast, smiling as she handed it to an older woman who had been one of their first customers. "Still the best coffee in town," the woman said warmly. Leilani grinned. "We try." She glanced around, taking in the cozy wooden interior, the walls adorned with pictures of local farmers who supplied their beans, the chalkboard menu featuring specialty drinks named after different Hawaiian beaches. This wasn't just a cafe. This was theirs. She looked toward the entrance just as Jackson stepped inside, carrying a bag of fresh pastries from a local bakery. He caught her gaze and winked, making her stomach flip, just like it always did. A year of marriage, and he still looked at her like she was the best damn thing that had ever happened to him. Jackson walked over, dropping a quick kiss to her temple before setting the bag down. "Morning, Mrs. Caldwell." Leilani rolled her eyes, but her smile was unstoppable. "Morning, Mr. Caldwell." Jackson leaned against the counter, glancing around the cafe. "Looks like we're getting busier every day." Leilani nodded. "Guess people can't resist a good cup of coffee." Jackson tilted his head, watching her. "Or maybe it's the woman behind the counter." Leilani blushed, but before she could respond, the cafe's side door swung open, and a few volunteers from their community outreach program walked in, carrying donation bins. A year ago, they had decided that their cafe wouldn't just be a business, it would be a place that gave back to the island. So every weekend, a portion of their profits went to help local families in need, and once a month, they hosted free coffee and breakfast events for those struggling in the community. It was more than Leilani had ever dreamed of. She glanced at Jackson again, the man who had walked into her life unexpectedly, who had challenged her, supported her, loved her through it all. And as he reached for her hand, lacing their fingers together, she knew. This was exactly where she was meant to be. Together. Life. Always. And just like that, a missed bus turned into a love story that neither of them saw coming. Leilani thought she was just a simple girl, working hard to make ends meet. Jackson thought he was just passing through, a millionaire with no real ties to the island. But fate had other plans. Through unexpected encounters, stolen moments in the rain, and a love that refused to be ignored, they found something that money could never buy, a home in each other. This story isn't just about romance. It's about taking chances, about believing you're worthy of love, and about finding the courage to follow your heart, wherever it may lead. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories. We bring you the most heartfelt, emotional, and inspiring love stories, ones that remind us all that sometimes the best things in life come when we least expect them. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.